area, but Henry weighed in about 55, 60 pounds. Henry was well fed. My dad took him to work every day, and this is no joke. 10 o'clock was going to be break time for my dad, and Henry would eat a piece of cheese toast with my dad every day at 10 o'clock. He lived a very, very comfortable existence. I'm not exactly sure when it was. It was fairly early on, though. Maybe Henry was a year and a half or so, the first time that he bit someone. And I don't exactly remember who it was. It might have even been my sister. But the circumstances were such that you could almost reasonably explain it. For example, you know that you shouldn't mess with a dog's food or get close to their mouth while they're eating because you're just begging to get bit. I do the same way with church members. Don't mess with it. Anyway, it was a circumstance kind of like that, the first time that he bit somebody. And so it was thought, that kind of stinks, but, it was kind of understandable. Well, over time, this type of thing kept happening, and it wasn't surrounding just food times. He bit my sister at least twice, if not more than that. One time so much so, or so deeply, she had to go to urgent care to get it treated. My parents had some work done at the house. An electrician was there. He bit the electrician. He bit a customer at my dad's work so that he couldn't go there anymore. And this kept going on and kept going on. And my dad was so perplexed because they loved this dog so much. And my dad said this. He said, "I've always said that I'm not going to have a dog that bites." And I'm thinking, you have a dog whose spiritual gift is biting. I got to the point, I was very nervous around Henry. I remember one time sitting on the couch with him, and he was laying on his back, and I was rubbing his belly, which typically a dog is absolutely delighted. And Henry seemed to be just kind of delighted. He was like melted chocolate laying on the couch there. He is just as happy as a lark. I'm rubbing his belly, and honestly, within a split second, that dog flips over and lunges at my face. So I decided, Henry, we're just going to keep this very civil between you and I. But this type of thing kept going on, and finally my parents got to the point and place where they decided that something is wrong. As much as we love this dog, something's wrong with him. They wound up having to put Henry down because he had bit so many people. They were deeply saddened by this. I was not. Disney says, because they came up with a movie that says, all dogs go to heaven. I'm pretty sure one isn't. Sometime after they'd put Henry down, I asked this question. I said, just how many people or how many times did Henry bite somebody? And they said the best we could tell, 16. What? 16 times? Henry is no longer with us because Henry would bite. I didn't like Henry. I didn't want to be around Henry because Henry would bite you. Now, you understand that relative to dogs, but the truth is very much this. Even as, and sometimes even particularly as followers of Christ, have you known anybody that wore the Jesus jersey that would bite you? You ever been bit by somebody that says, "Hey, onward, Christian soldiers, I'm marching as to..." Yeah, they're marching as to war, right? After you. This is not a very theological statement, but there's some significant theological truth in it. I believe the biblical admonition for you, if you profess to be a follower of Jesus, is this. Don't be Henry. Don't be Henry. I believe the expectation that God has on us, not only as we interact with each other as followers of Christ, but how we interact with those outside the body of Christ, ought not be such that we are effectively biting people. We ought to be operating in a very different fashion. In fact, a fashion that is exemplified by an interaction that Jesus had with some folks in Luke chapter 14. If you would look with me there, Luke chapter 14. And in this one passage, you're going to see several, or actually three different sections, and we're going to kind of walk through those as we get to them. But Luke chapter 14, starting with verse 1, Jesus gives us, I believe, some helpful practical application that will ensure that you and I don't operate like a Henry. Luke 14, starting with verse 1. There Luke tells us one Sabbath when Jesus went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, that's the Pharisees, were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then Jesus took him and healed him and sent him away and said to the Pharisees, "Which of you having a son," some translations yield that a donkey, which some of you as parents can understand that. So, "which of you having a donkey or an ox that is fallen into a well on a Sabbath day will not immediately pull him out?" Verse 6 says, though, that they could not reply to these things. They are silent. Well, just in these few verses, I believe Jesus gives us a pretty important application. And that's this: don't let your religion be a roadblock. Do not let your religion be a roadblock. Jesus, as verse 1 unfolds, has shown up at the home of a Pharisee. And he's not just shown up there, he would have only been there because of an invitation. You think, well, what in the world are the Pharisees doing inviting Jesus over there? Well, the reason is because they wanted, in verse 1, to watch him carefully. They thought, well, maybe let's get Jesus kind of up close and personal. We can have a dialogue. There can be some exchange that occurs between us, and perhaps we can discern something that would give us reason to dispose of Jesus so that we can publicly humiliate him, so that all these crowds that are following him can be dispensed and we can get back to life as normal. So they invite Jesus over for dinner. It seems that there's a lot of people there for this what sounds like a fairly large banquet. Lots of Pharisees, those whose job it is to effectively interpret the laws of God for the people of God. Jesus is there, but there's also a man, we're told, who was present, and whether or not he was a Pharisee, we don't know. But he was there, and Luke says that he had this condition that's described here as dropsy. This condition was one where the tissues of the body would retain excessive amounts of fluid, unusual, unhealthy, dangerous amounts of fluid in the various tissues of the body. And so it sounds like this is a condition that has been progressively getting worse to the point where this man's life may be in peril. And so this man is observed, and Jesus decides, you know what? I'm going to ask a question. Now, Jesus was brought there, he was invited there under the pretense of hospitality, but the real reason was so that they might scrutinize him, that they might look over their glasses at him and see if there was some problem they could find. But Jesus turns the tables and he decides he's going to be the question asker. And so the question very simply is this: hey guys, you're the law guys. You're the ones that are thinking about all of these prohibitions that are found in the left-hand side of the Bible, and all this whole series of rabbinical tradition that has been erected over time to fill in all the gaps where God's Word might have been silent. So guys, tell me, is it lawful, is it okay to heal somebody on the Sabbath? Because this day was the Sabbath. And what's their answer? They don't have one. In all truth, they probably, in their minds, had an idea, had a thought, and the thought was this: no, sir. But they knew that would sound heartless, that would be cruel, that would sound like the wrong answer to say, no, you can't do this. But this was a group of people that had spent a lot of time thinking about the Sabbath. God had just been as clear as to say that you're not to work on the Sabbath day, that you're to set it aside and to keep it holy. This is a day that's consecrated to the thought of the worship of God, where you take a break from work. But over time, they had developed all of these egregious rules and stipulations. And the fact that they were having a meal on the Sabbath, the only way that could have happened is if it had been prepared the day before. Because you're not going to be you might be able to slightly heat something, but there's no significant preparation. In fact, the table would already need to be set, because to set the table on the Sabbath, that would have been work. So he's asking these guys who've been thinking an awful lot about an awful lot of rules, hey guys, hey rule keepers, Is it against the rules to heal somebody on the Sabbath? And they don't have anything to say. So it was almost as if Jesus was saying, hearing no objection, and what does he do? This guy who has experienced this condition for who knows how long, all of a sudden is instantly made well. They don't say anything. Why don't they say anything? I think the reason is because in their minds, they're saying, wait a minute, this is against the rules, but they're afraid to say that it's against the rules. The question, though, was this: why would they have had objection? Why would they have sought to argue the point that it would have been inappropriate to bring healing into this man's body on the Sabbath day? Jesus knew what was going on in them, and he understood this. It was not the Pharisees' faith in God that kept them from wanting to see this man healed. It wasn't their lack of belief that God could bring healing. It wasn't their lack of awareness that God knew exactly what this man's challenge was. Their reservations against healing this man were not rooted in their faith in God, rather by their religious traditions. Hear me in this. There is a significant, in fact, there is all the difference in the world between faith in God, a relationship with God, and religion. Now understand, as I say that, religion is not should not necessarily have a negative connotation to it. But understand this: your faith is effectively the sum total of things that you believe about God, that you believe about His Word, that you believe what God has revealed in your Word. That's your faith. Your religion is the manner in which you act out those beliefs, that you act out that faith. Here again, the problem with the Pharisees was not a bad faith, a lack of faith in God, a lack of faith in God's ability. The impediment, the obstacle, was not in what they believed. The impediment, the roadblock, was in their practice of their beliefs. They were almost certainly fond of phrases like this: well, that's not how we've always done it. That's not what Grandpa did. That's not what Grandma did. That's not what Moses did. And consistently were holding up the stop sign. They were ready to pull it out that day were it not for the probing nature of Jesus' question. The application, I believe, is pretty simple and awfully important. And that's this: don't let your religion be a roadblock. Well, how can this manifest itself? What are we to do with a thought like this? Several years ago, I was talking with a lady who had visited with a friend, some, family or friends out of state in a rural area. And they had not necessarily planned to go to church on a Sunday, but they were gone on a Sunday and decided, you know what, we're going to go visit this little church down the road. The person I was talking to did not hadn't necessarily planned on going to church, and so she dressed the best that she could. She had a blouse and she had some dress pants, some dress slacks, not like crazy formal, but not streetwalker pants, just nice ladies' dress slacks. That's the best that she's got. Her friend has a skirt and a blouse, and so that's what she wears. They go to this church. They park, they go in, they find a seat, they sit down. It's a few minutes before the service begins when an usher comes over to them, and the person I'm talking to, they say this: women don't wear pants in this church. And her thought is, well, maybe this one does. But the implication was very clear. That was against the rules, and what they wanted and what they expected is exactly what she did, to get up and leave. Her friend stays in the service while she goes and sits out in the car. Now, hearing this, I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I mean, are you kidding me? Because we're not talking about, because I believe absolutely in modesty. And I believe there's a biblical case, a biblical admonition, a biblical expectation for modesty. But modesty was not in view in this. And the other thing that baffled me was that this person I'm talking to, I knew that this is somebody that knows and walks with the Lord, but they had no idea anything about her. This is just somebody off the street that, for all they knew, could be light years away from God and in desperate need of being able, for the first time perhaps, to hear the gospel that there's a God in heaven that loves them and a Savior that died for them. But was she going to hear that message in that church that day? No. Was it because of the limitations of their faith in God? No. It was because of their religious traditions. It wasn't their faith in God, it was how they decided we're going to act on this. And what they did was to completely miss out on an opportunity to minister in the life of someone, not because of God's standards, but because of their rules. The Pharisees that day were getting ready to miss out on an opportunity to minister to somebody who had need. This person experienced a need on the Sabbath, and Jesus says, hey guys, is it right or wrong? They don't want to say anything because they know that Jesus will have them if they say something. But He knows where their hearts are. They are absolutely against this. But Jesus meets the need and ministers to the person in need. And the application is pretty simple. Don't be a Henry. As somebody that says that you're a follower of Jesus, part of how it is that we get along, not simply with each other, but in particular those outside the faith and outside the walls of the church, is to ensure that how it is that we act out our faith is that deals with people where they are and ministers to those that are in need. But the passage continues, though, and Jesus in verse 7 says that He told a parable to those who were invited. When He noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying this to them, verse 8, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come to you and say, give your place to this person, and then you'll begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you're invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. The application from this is pretty simple and again clear. Here it is. Don't let your honor be self-imposed. Don't let your religion be a roadblock. Don't let your honor be self-imposed. Jesus in verse 7 is noting how it was when these guys showed up at the Pharisees' home, how it was they seated themselves. And it seemed there were those that showed up early, intentionally early, because they want to get a good seat. Up close, right? So we know they're not Baptists. Baptists show up early to get the back seats. These are Pharisees. They want front seats. And so Jesus noticed how they chose these places of honor up near the host. And the motivation behind this was very simple. We get there, we get early, we get up close to the front table. That suggests to everyone who shows up later, hey, we are connected. We're a person of influence. We are someone who matters. And so Jesus gives them an illustration to say, don't operate that way. So He appeals to something they were familiar with, and that would have been a wedding feast. In the wedding feast, He says, don't sit down in the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. Here's the thought. Suppose it is that there is a wedding. Maybe it's a friend of yours that you have known for an awfully long time. Maybe you grew up just down the street from each other. You rode bicycles together. You rode the school bus together. You and your families went on vacation together. You might have even gone to college together. And you've been close for years, really close. But as your friend has gotten engaged and over time, you've remained close, though you're working different places and different towns, different companies. That they've gotten engaged and they planned a wedding, but they didn't ask you to be a part of the wedding party, not to serve as a groomsman, not to serve as a bridesmaid. Anyway, but you do get an invitation, and so you absolutely are going to be there for this wedding, and you're so happy for your friend. It's a beautiful wedding. After the ceremony, you know, the typical MO is this, that the wedding party stays at the wedding location for pictures while everyone else goes to the reception, whether that's at the facility or somewhere else. And so you go ahead and you head to the reception site. The bridesmaid, groomsmen, bride and groom families, they're taking pictures. And when you get to the reception hall, you notice that there is a head table up front that says reserved, but there's, 4, 5, 6 tables up near the front that no one is seated at. And so in your mind, you think, you know what? I have been friends with them forever. We grew up together. We have been as thick as thieves. We talk to each other on a regular basis. We've been in each other's homes. We vacation together. We are as close as we can possibly be. So you decide, you know what? I am close. So I'm going to go sit up here near the front. I'm going to go sit up here just in front of that head table so that I might be able to holler over at them periodically during the reception. So you do that, and then the wedding party shows up, and bit by bit those empty tables begin to fill in. The bridesmaids are seated, the groomsmen are seated, and the table where you're at is now filled up, and all of a sudden the wedding director comes over to you and whispers in your ear, "Excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am, would you mind giving this seat up for one of the bridesmaids?" And you're, "Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. I'm so sorry to have sat here." And so then you stand up and you start looking for a seat. And now the only seats available are not the closest seats, but the seats furthest in the back. And all that happened because of this. You decided on your own, I'm connected. You decided on your own, I am somebody. You decided on your own, I am of position, I am of sort that I should be up here at the expense of others. Jesus says, do not do that. Don't do that. Any honor that you experience, it should not be that which you give to yourself. It ought to be that which comes from others. Because about the time that you start heaping honor on yourself, you're going to see your stock diminish. But when you think of yourself as nothing, the honor can begin to pile up. I know it's happened to me, and I'm sure you have experienced this as well. Individuals, over time, it could be in church, it could be out of church, it could be in the workplace, who feel compelled to tell you how much they know, where they went to school, or how much they've been trained. You know anybody like that? You ever experienced that? And in various ways, they're trying to communicate just how smart they are. Have you noticed this, that the people who have to tell you how smart they are typically are not very smart? The people who tend to tell you how trained they are typically are not very good. I generally operate under this premise. If you think I'm smart, I want it to be because you came to that conclusion on your own. If you think I'm the dumbest person in the room, I want you to be of that opinion because you came to that opinion on your own. Not because I've told you how smart or how dumb I am. The principle again is this: don't let your honor be self-imposed. Because the truth is, does anybody like to be around that kind of person? Well, the short answer is no. And how well does that reflect, not simply on you as a person, but on the one that you ultimately represent? Don't let your honor be self-imposed. But Jesus continues with another example in verse 12. He says, he also said to the man who had invited him, when you give, verse 12, a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. Instead, when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection. The premise behind this, the application, is very simple. Again, don't let your kindness be an investment. Don't let your kindness be an investment. All right, so Jesus has observed this ordeal going on at the Pharisees' house. He's noted how some of these individuals have decided on their own, man, I am really important and I want to sit up here at the front tables, only later to wind up getting escorted to the back because they're really not that important. Then he's noticed this as well, that there are some who are there and they're like, man, this is so nice. This is so great. I'm so glad that so-and-so and Whoop-de-Doo invited me to be here for this. Man, they are so hospitable. They are so gracious. You know what? I need to plan one of these things for November. And you know what? I want to invite them too. And you know what? In fact, not only am I going to invite them, there's some folks at my table. I'm hoping that I might be able to show up at some events that they have, maybe be invited to their daughter's wedding as well. So I'm going to invite them too. And I've got some business deals that I'm working on as well, and it would really be good to have some connections. I'm going to invite this person that was sitting behind me at that feast because, that's probably going to help me establish those connections and maybe be able to land that deal. Jesus says this: when you give a dinner or a banquet, don't invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors. Why? It says, lest they also invite you in return and be repaid. Jesus is aware that what's going on there in the home of the Pharisee is this whole back-scratching operation. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I am hosting this with the thought that I might get invited to your significant event later. I'm letting you hobnob with Jesus with the hope that you might allow me to hobnob with so-and-so next week. And very easily what can happen is that we get into our circles, those that we feel most connected to or that we want to most be connected to, and we scratch that back with the hope that they'll scratch ours. We do something, we demonstrate kindness, we demonstrate hospitality, we demonstrate graciousness, but the reason is not altruistic. It is not because, I just think this is a good thing to do. I just want to be nice, I want to be gracious, I want to be hospitable. But the thought behind it is this: if I do this, I may get something back in return. Instead, Jesus says, if you want to really show hospitality, if you want to really show kindness, graciousness, really minister to somebody in need, you do that to those who have no ability to repay you. He says, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. And you think about someone who was handicapped in the first century, someone who was blind, someone who was lame, someone who was crippled. They absolutely are operating on the fringes of society. And the only way they can get by is because someone would happen, by virtue of their begging, to put some coins in their cup. There's no social safety net like we have here in the United States. The government is not going to take care of these people. They would starve to death were it not for the graciousness of others. And Jesus says, hey, why don't you invite that person in? Why don't you show graciousness to them? Why don't you show hospitality to them? Why don't you seek to meet their need? Because that person has no means whereby of repaying you. And the only reason that you would do that is for the sheer act of the goodness of the act itself. Don't let your kindness be an investment. For CentriKid, our kids again this year went back to Gardner-Webb University, which is where I did undergraduate work. And walking into what used to be the student center, where the cafeteria was and still is housed, out in front of that there is this, all the sidewalks there, it's not concrete, they're brick pavers. But out in front of that, it's called the Dover Campus Center, there's all these bricks that have in honor of, in memory of, or somebody's name on it. And there's, I don't know, hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many bricks there are with names engraved on them. And when I saw that, I knew the story behind it. When I was at Gardner-Webb, I was part of what was called the Student Alumni Council. And one of the things that we did and we were used to do was to help raise funds for the school. And as I was graduating, something that they had started that year, they were doing this massive capital campaign. They were trying to get and use us to try to influence other graduating seniors to give $250. So not an insignificant amount, but not $25,000 either. But to try to get every graduating senior to give $250. And the thought was this: if we can get people in the pattern and practice of giving something, even if it takes them time to do that, well, that'll increase the likelihood that over time they will continue to give back to the school. But they didn't just say, hey guys, how about giving us $250 because now that you're graduating, you got this envelope that says how much debt you have for this college education you've received, right? They don't just say, how about giving us $250? What they say is, you can give $250 over, 2 or 3 years, and once your gift is completed, you'll be able to have whatever you want inscribed on one of these bricks that's going to be out in front of the campus center for perpetuity. You can place it in honor and memory of somebody. You can put your own name on it. As I was looking at those bricks, I saw a number of familiar names. And those names are on there because they gave that money. But why exactly did they give the money? Because you get a brick. You get a brick. You give something, you get something. Jesus was saying to this group of first century Pharisees, that's what you're doing. There's all this stuff that you're doing that you're calling ministry, that you're trying to cloak in spirituality, but the only sole motivation for this, the only real reason you're doing this is so that somehow your back may get scratched, somehow that your pockets may be padded, somehow that your palm may be greased, that somehow you will get something by giving something. Jesus says, don't let your kindness, don't let your generosity, don't let the ministry that you allow God to use you in the lives of others, don't let that be an investment. Don't do it because you think, well, I'm going to get something for this. They're going to pay me back. I'm accumulating some chips that I can call in later. He says, no, instead, understand this, you'll be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Do this not because your recipient is paying attention, but because God is paying attention and you want Him to be pleased with you. I didn't like Henry because Henry would bite. Henry looked good. They kept him groomed, but Henry would bite. There are too many that profess to follow Jesus that look good, that by all appearances have their act together, but they bite. I think the words of Jesus can be effectively summarized this way: don't be a Henry. Don't let your honor be self-imposed. Don't let your kindness be an investment. And don't let your religion, the manner in which you practice your faith, be a roadblock and an obstacle to ministering to others. Why? Because violating what Jesus says, first of all, it reflects poorly on you. And legitimately reflects poorly on you. Beyond that, more broadly, it reflects poorly on the groups, for example, this church that you associate with. But far more than this, and most importantly, it reflects so horribly poorly on the one you profess to follow. So how about you? How about you? The fact that you're here this morning on a Sunday, on a beautiful day, is not proof of, but a good hint that you're somebody who is interested in God and spiritual things and may very well have a relationship with Him. But how do you live that out among other people? Don't be a Henry. Will you bow your heads with me? As we've unpacked what Jesus said this morning, it's entirely possible that there is in your heart a bit of discomfort, perhaps. Maybe it's because there are people even this past week that you know that God has brought your way because He wanted you to minister to them, but you decided, you know what, they are too dirty to even mess with. I can't get my hands dirty. And it wasn't your faith that blocked it. It was not the